Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Tooele Happy Hour podcast, starring Jared Anderson and David Weiss. Today's guest is David Pyne, and he has one
David
heck of
Pyne.
Is it Pyne or Payne?
It's Pyne.
Pyne.
Yeah.
That's what I meant to say.
Yeah. He's, okay. David Pyne, Deputy Director of the National Operations and Congressional Liaison for EMP Task Force on National and Homeland Security. That's a lot. That's a mouthful. But EMP's electromagnetic pulse is, if anyone is in the doomsday or prepper community, you will recognize that word. It is, it's the end of civilization in a can.
And our congressman is really big on EMP weapons. He likes to talk about this. Congressman Chris Stewart. This is one of his topics. So it's interesting to actually have someone who sat in on these councils and knows a lot about this subject. David, can you introduce yourself to the audience and just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me on the show. This is a great opportunity to talk. I am a former U.S. Army headquarters staff officer. I served on the U.S. Army headquarters staff from 2000 to 2003 during the initial phases of the Iraq War. And as you mentioned, I'm the Deputy Director of National Operations for the Task Force on National Homeland Security. And I've also worked as the Policy Director, National Security Policy Director for Senator Mike Lee on his initial 2010 campaign. And I'm also a veterans leader and a West Valley honorary police colonel. So those are some of my credentials.
Yeah, that's a lot. And with becoming an honorary police colonel, was that kind of led to because of the emergency management role in preparedness, or how did that come about?
No, I mean, it's really just a volunteer organization of concerned citizens that are willing to spend the time to, support our police officers. And, it tends to be some, more prominent individuals that have been longtime community activists, but there's really no hard requirement for serving. So that's what it is.
See, I like the idea of being able to have a voluntary police force. I've always liked that idea, but I've been told I'm crazy for having these thoughts, and I've been told it's impossible to do, and I've been told the insurance for it would be too crazy. So to actually hear some sort of semblance of the idea actually existing within our state, that's inspiring to me.
Well, voluntary or auxiliary police don't commonly show up to, don't commonly respond to incidents because of that. Just because the liability there is too heavy. They haven't been through. Now, I guess if someone goes and gets certified, then they can, do it armed. But other than that, I don't think any city wants to arm a citizen and have him patrol the street as a citizen and absorb that cost. But anyways, David, how did you get into the EMP field?
So I've been very concerned and very diligent kind of in informing myself and studying the nuclear issue, nuclear missiles, arms control, disarmament, EMP, since, I don't want to date myself, but since about 1986. So I've been actually 85. So, I've done extensive research over the last 40 or so years. And in 2018, I was just kind of doing some more research on EMP, and I Looked up the EMP Task Force. Then we were known as the EMP Task Force. Now we're just the Task Force on National Homeland Security. And Dr. Peter Pry, I had followed him. He's our late executive director who sadly passed away from cancer just late last year. And I decided to reach out, and because I noticed that Utah did not have a state director. So I volunteered to serve as state director in 2018 and sent my resume and was quickly accepted. And then 2 years later, I was promoted to the national leadership as Deputy Director of National Operations.
Mm. And you're able to do that while living in Utah. You don't have to move to DC. You just kind of, is there a lot of telecommuting, or is there every once in a while you got to catch a flight there?
So we do most of our business via Zoom meetings. Obviously, I do public media interviews and write extensively on the national interest and the other, as well as papers on our EMP Task Force site and my own Real War newsletter site, which is at dpyne.substack.com. So, yeah, thankfully, I'm able to do it mostly remotely.
Oh, very good. Yeah, it's I enjoy when I read fiction. I enjoy reading post-apocalyptic fiction, and they almost always start out the same with an EMP. Almost all, because I guess either factually or just in the zeitgeist, that's the easiest way to attack a country, and bring it to its knees. And realistically, that might be the only way any other group of countries could attack us.
Yeah, I would say there's probably 4 different ways that our country could be destroyed and we could be in that post-apocalypse situation. One, of course, is nuclear weapons.
And the other 3 are college kids run amok. All right, got it.
Super EMP weapons, as you mentioned, being the other, and then a massive cyber attack. It could accomplish much of the same things that EMP could accomplish. We'd still have working cars, but there'd be no gas, and to fuel our food infrastructure and our transportation, and then biological weapons. A very lethal biological attack, not just COVID, which kills 1%, but anthrax, for example, that kills 90% or something along those lines.
David, have you ever seen an actual EMP weapon?
No. So the Air Force has EMP testing facilities where they'll put an aircraft that's EMP hardened on a platform, and then have some kind of EMP emitter that will to ensure that it's sufficiently hardened against EMP. So they have things like that. I was also, I work as part of the Harden the Grid Coalition, which is led by the Center for Security Policy, and the current president, Tommy Waller. I think it was a year or 2 ago. He said he was going to offer up his old SUV for EMP testing, so we could have test cars and see how vulnerable they are to EMP attack. Because there's a some degree of uncertainty whether cars would really be able to survive EMP attack. I think the general consensus is that the later the model of the cars, the less likely they would be to function. Cars I think now have come with maybe a few thousand computer chips. Used to be like 1 or 14 back in the early 80s. But for sure, pre 1980 cars would still function.
Oh yeah, you got the old hippie with the VW Bug. He's going to be rolling heavy. He'll be fine. Yep. So let's explain to everyone what an EMP is real quick, just in the basic form.
Yeah. So there's 2 types of there's actually 3 types of EMP. There's there's man-made EMP, which consists of nuclear and conventional EMP, electromagnetic pulse. Essentially, we found out about that with the Starfish Prime nuclear test in the Pacific in 1963, when a nuclear test from hundreds of miles away knocked out the power and the lights in Hawaii. So that was kind of the first time we learned about that. The Russians subsequently did a test in the Soviet Union, which they later published the results for that following the collapse of the Soviet Union, in which they detonate a large nuclear weapon and just have massive effects, EMP effects. So
now,
the threat
isn't it when they detonate it high up in the atmosphere so that you honestly fallout or the nuclear burn is not the concern? It just sends out a electromagnetic pulse that essentially fries your microchips. It unlinks all the little links inside of them.
Yeah, that's right. EMP is kind of a technology destroying weapon, and there's kind of a burst radius, EMP burst radius, or an EMP pancake, as I used to refer to it, that occurs, and it depends on the yield of the nuclear weapon, or whether it's enhanced for EMP effects, like what we call a super EMP weapon, which is a nuclear weapon which has a much greater enhanced EMP effect, as well as the altitude, as you mentioned. So a ground burst nuclear weapon, of course, would have much more limited EMP effect, whereas an EMP weapon exploded at, say, 200 kilometers would have a far greater EMP effect over much of the country.
Yeah, and
the method of delivery for a system like that would not be a simple tactic. I mean, it would probably be pretty difficult to deliver an EMP weapon to the center of the United States, wouldn't it?
I think it'd be the easiest one to deliver.
Well, that's interesting you mentioned that. So there's this Chinese spy balloon, which I'm just about to publish an article this evening on my Real War newsletter website. And I assess that, it could potentially, I'm not saying it is equipped with a super EMP weapon, but it could be. And if it did have a super EMP weapon on it, it could, it's currently over Missouri, which is really the optimum, what we consider the center of the country. And if it had, if this balloon or Chinese airship had a rocket, it could launch a short range rocket higher up into the atmosphere. It could detonate an EMP, a super EMP weapon, which could potentially take out all the electronics of the continental United States. So it's not just, what I'm saying is, a balloon is fairly low technology, in terms of the delivery system. There's multiple ways that, obviously, even, there's cruise missiles that could be used. If, a hypersonic cruise missile, for example, there's ballistic missiles, even a short range ballistic missile mounted on a ship, like in the Panama Canal or, the Gulf of Mexico, for example, could launch a missile high into the sky, which would have a regional effect potentially. Not necessarily, it wouldn't affect the entire grid, but Dr. Peter Pyne, our late executive director, he assessed that if an EMP weapon were exploded over the eastern U.S., just by taking out the eastern grid, it could take out the entire grid because of the cascading failure effect that would occur.
Yeah, and even if it didn't, the damage done there would send repercussions through the whole nation. It'd drastically change our value of life overnight, drastically, our quality
Absolutely.
of life.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this all the time in my interviews. It could, it would cause Americans to essentially starve in place. There'd be shortages of water, let alone purified water. The grocery stores would be bare. Cars wouldn't work. So yeah, the entire economy would break down. Our financial system would break down. We'd have a barter economy, and there'd be roving gangs, criminal gangs that would kill people just for the last scraps of food. So yeah, that's a really hellacious picture to imagine happening to our great country.
Oh yeah. I think that was kind of the unspoken concern when North Korea was doing their tests, was them not necessarily sending a nuke into Guam or Japan, but doing an EMP over that where one, it has a larger effect. It has a larger radius of damage.
Yeah, I mean, North Korea is one of the real big EMP threats because they're believed to have two super EMP satellites orbiting over the U.S. since about 2014, and they come over from the southern hemisphere. So we don't have any good detection systems along our southern border, and so the warning time would be minimal to none if they were to explode a super EMP satellite over the U.S. And they could do so at the press of a button, and we wouldn't even likely know who attacked us and who to retaliate against.
So what you're saying is they have two satellites with nuclear ordnance on them that just need to have a button pushed, and then whatever they're over, and that'd be high enough that the spread of that would be the total destruction.
Yeah, they orbit at low Earth orbit, so they're at the optimal height for a super EMP detonation. So yeah, we don't want to necessarily piss off the North Koreans or the Chinese or the Russians because they likely have those satellites as well.
Hopefully we do. But enough doom and gloom because we're going to come back to it. You said there's three ways. I imagine another one of the ways would be a solar flare.
That's right. So there's nuclear and conventional EMP attack, man-made events, and then there's a super geomagnetic storm or solar storm, which is essentially a large solar flare which emanates from the sun. So every 12 years we have, there's what's called a solar cycle. Every 12 years there's a solar cycle. And there's kind of like a heightened activity, which is what we have this year. This is actually the worst of the 12-year cycle we're experiencing right now this year, and then it just kind of varies. It goes from low to high. So this year is the highest threat of the solar cycle, the 12-year solar cycle, where we could see some super geomagnetic storms. Now super geomagnetic storms are measured in different degrees. So what I'm talking about is really like a Carrington level event, which in 1859, there was a super geomagnetic storm, which affected the entire world, caused the telegraph lines to burn, and, people were electrocuted, telegraph operators, by some accounts, rail lines were melted. We actually don't believe that. Dr. Pry doesn't believe that actually occurred, but certainly our electronics could be totally fried. I will say that super solar storm would likely have a global effect, whereas EMP attacks would be localized against the countries that were attacked and perhaps their neighbors, for example, southern Canada and northern Mexico, if we were attacked. But the super EMP weapons actually have a greater effect against microelectronics than super solar storms. So the damage we would see, the extent of the damage would likely be more severe in an EMP attack scenario than super solar storm.
Would the power lines that are buried underground, would they be resistant to EMP, or would they also be susceptible?
So they would be susceptible, as would natural gas lines would likely catch fire. So there'd be fires burning in the cities. There'd be explosions, at natural gas facilities. So there'd be a lot of effects. It's really unfortunate. You would think that making those lines underground would be sufficient protection, but the depth at which we bury them is just simply not sufficient to protect them against EMP attack effects.
So what do you do to protect up your system from EMP? What can be done?
So there's various ways to harden EMP, harden electronics against EMP. The easiest way on an individual level is it's hard to really harden it. You can buy a Faraday cage. There's various kinds of Faraday cages. You can get, for example, you can get a metal trash can and then put electronics in a trash bag in the can, and we believe it could protect against EMP effects. But on the national level, the cost, we estimate the cost would be approximately $100 per citizen to harden the electrical power grid against EMP attack. That's really the focus of our organization, is to harden the electrical power grid against EMP and cyber attack. Because if we believe if we can do that, then we can, that really provides the fundamentals to be able to reconstitute and rebuild our civilization.
Well, that's interesting, because you just missed the boat on that payment, because we just sent about that to Ukraine recently. I think it was $40 billion in aid, which, divide that by 300 million,
332 million,
yeah, something like that. I think you get about $100 a citizen, and boy, that you almost had it.
Yeah, so we have about 306 million citizens in the country, and then about nearly 30 million, 26 or 27 million illegals and legal immigrants. So you're right. I mean, there was 47 billion that we just sent to Ukraine, adds up to, I think, a total of about 115 billion. And the price tag that we estimate to harden the entire national grid is about 30 billion. So the dereliction of duty on the part of our, the president and congressional leaders is really just beyond all imagination, I think.
Well, let's now, not to play that game, but this dereliction of duty has been going on through both parties and all administrations for my whole life. There hasn't been any. It doesn't seem like there's any political appetite to do any labor at home anymore.
So President Trump is the only president in U.S. history that's ever taken action to protect the U.S. against EMP attack. He passed an EMP executive order in 2019 that did really everything he could as president to harden the grid, short of declaring a national emergency, which I've been calling for him to do. Because the only way that you can authorize funding as president, really independent of Congress, is to invoke a national emergency, as he did with the border crisis, the border wall, in which he transferred congressional funding from other programs to fund that border wall. And that's exactly what the president could do with the EMP crisis and the EMP emergency as well.
And that's really not that much. I mean, if we look at the debt, we all owe about $260,000 already. You just tack on another 100, and you keep going with that.
What's the price of houses right now?
Oh, well,
it's only half a house, half a single family house in rural Utah right now. I think that might pay for what do they call them? A honey bucket, one of them portable outhouses in Salt Lake, though. And I think in LA, you might be able to buy one of the tines off of a gutter.
I think just by way of comparison, we just authorized, I think, $858 billion for the Department of Defense. None of that money is being used to harden the grid. So, that's a small fraction of our defense budget, let alone our total budget or the national debt, which is, what is that, $32 trillion right now? It's outrageous.
And you'd think that hardening the grid would be the priority of defense, because it would defend us against natural disaster. It'd defend us against enemy threat. It'd defend us. Right now, northern Mexico's in outright civil war with the cartels, which are threatening our southern borders and our southern states. Who's to say that one of those new cartels down there doesn't get a wild hair thinking that, they'd be able to sell more drugs and people if they destroyed some infrastructure.
Yeah, that's the real irony and the real scandal is that, we call it the Department of Defense, but what does it really do for defense? We project military power to other countries. We waste our blood and treasure in fighting forever wars that really have nothing to do with U.S. national security whatsoever. None of those Middle Eastern wars, short of a rapid retaliation against Afghanistan really had anything to do with U.S. national security. And I've argued in the national interest on the real war that sending aid to Ukraine really does nothing to benefit U.S. national security. It does nothing to keep us to make us more safe or more secure, let alone our allies. Quite the opposite. It's serving to potentially provoke a massive Russian cyber EMP attack, which could wipe the U.S. off the face of the earth in terms of collapsing our government and splintering our country into dozens of entities.
Yeah, well, even if it didn't, just the loss in trade coming out of Russia and the Ukraine right now is sending the whole world into kind of a tailspin.
I heard from CNN that we've absorbed it pretty well.
Yeah, we're good. Yeah, we're golden. Yeah, let's ask China in 3 years how they're doing.
Yeah, well, Russia's absorbed it. I mean, their GDP went down 3%, from our sanctions, whereas Ukraine's went down over 50%. So yeah. That economic war idea really hasn't panned out very well.
Well, it caused the ruble to be gold backed, and then it hopped right back up.
Yeah, the ruble's at a 7-year high last I checked, as is the Russian trade surplus. So we really just shoot ourselves in the foot. We caused the global recession and a lot of pain here at home, with massively increased gas prices and inflation that we could have avoided largely.
Yep, big wins on the world stage. We're throwing big W's up on the board.
Yeah, and even that, I mean, worse than that, we're unilaterally disarming the U.S. military by giving them vast quantities of high-tech weapons that, are straight out of U.S. military stocks. I mean, at least the Abrams tanks are not coming out of U.S. military stocks. They're going to be new production. But in terms of, the tens of thousands of Javelin anti-tank missiles, HIMARS, artillery, Stingers, I mean, all that stuff that we've been giving Ukraine. I mean, that's stuff that we're not going to have if we have to fight Russia or China in a direct fight. We're no longer ready to fight and win a war against a great power like Russia or China. And that's because of the Biden administration's decision to transfer our weapons to Ukraine.
Well, don't worry. I'm pretty sure that if something came to us, Ukraine would come and help.
Yeah, that's the real joke. I mean, we have this NATO alliance and we have alliances in the Pacific, but they mainly are one-sided. And most of the countries in NATO are small, tiny countries. Montenegro, Belgium, Luxembourg, North Macedonia. I mean, the idea that allying with tiny countries makes us stronger is ridiculous. I mean, the truth is that the only alliances that really matter for the U.S. are Britain and France because they have nuclear weapons. If we, allowed Germany, Japan, and South Korea and Taiwan to develop nukes like I've been advocating since the 80s and 90s, we'd be in a much safer and secure world right now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's that non-proliferation treaty kind of coming back around to bite us in the butt.
Right. Yep. Would this have even happened in Ukraine had they kept their nuclear weapons? I doubt they would have suffered an invasion.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and I oppose that as well. I oppose the Budapest Memorandum in which Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan transferred their nukes back to Russia. I think that was a mistake, that affected the world for the worse.
At the time, I think they had a good notion saying, well, we already have treaties and channels open with Russia. We already have those connections, so if they get the nukes back to Russia, we can closely monitor them better. But I think the big issue came with how we handled Russia after, the Iron Curtain fell. We didn't manage Russia like we did Poland and Romania. Those places we had a bigger hand in managing, and we kind of let Russia fumble a little bit and get taken over by these gangsters.
Well, I mean, that's a really good point. And I've been writing a new article for the National Interest in which I argue that one of the four the biggest mistake I think we made in losing the post-Cold War peace is that we failed to invite Russia to join NATO. If we had, for example, invited Russia and Ukraine to join NATO simultaneously before 1995, Russia would never have allied with China. And I mean, just imagine how much more safe and secure we would be if Russia was an ally. I mean, they're the the mightiest nuclear superpower on Earth with nearly 4.5 times more nukes than we do. I mean, China wouldn't mess with us. I mean, I don't even know if they would risk attacking Taiwan, which is their number one vital interest. And Russia, of course, would have no reason to invade any of its neighbors if the U.S. were not an enemy and expanding NATO to its borders in the Baltics and Ukraine.
Yeah.
Why is that? I've never understood why Russia has not tried to subscribe to the NATO subscription.
They have. So in 1990, Gorbachev told then Secretary of State Baker, we wanted this. We're the Soviet Union. We want to join NATO. And in 91, Yeltsin said the same thing. And in 2002, Putin asked a U.S. leader why Russia hadn't been invited to join NATO yet. So, I mean, Russia was open to joining NATO and wanting to join NATO for a long time. We just never, we had this Partnership for Peace, which is kind of like, quiet, quasi outlier membership. It's not really NATO membership, but it's kind of like a step towards NATO membership. And all the former Soviet republics joined the Partnership for Peace. But we never really invited. There was never a serious undertaking to have Russia join the security architecture of Europe, and that's a huge reason. That's really the main reason why Russia invaded in the first place, because we had essentially made Ukraine a de facto NATO member with the U.S. NATO or the U.S. Ukrainian Strategic Partnership Agreement of November 2021 that Biden signed with Zelensky.
Had we, I think we never invited Russia, so we had that perennial enemy. China was our lower tier manufacturing area on the global stage. The lower tier manufacturing belongs to essentially American companies, and Russia just didn't. We needed that perennial enemy so we could keep pouring funding into defense. But imagine, not just that, but had we got Russia on our side, that would have put more pressure on North Korea to play ball right and to continue to play ball, and maybe even to loosen up their, I wouldn't call them a police state, I would call them a prison state, but to loosen up some of those and to start working on the world stage. But yeah, I think as a nation, we fumbled that completely.
We really did. Yeah. I mean, that was a huge mistake. Also, our decision to essentially try to ally and build up China during the Cold War and especially after the Cold War with, WTO membership, most favored nation status for China. That started with, Jimmy Carter in 1979 and WTO membership started in 2001 with China joining the WTO. So, that built up China massively economically, transferred trillions of dollars in wealth from the U.S. to China, gave them, along with millions of high-paying, high-tech manufacturing jobs and probably tens of thousands of high-tech manufacturing industries, including dual-use military technology, which they've actually improved on. And they actually, in many key weapon areas, they now have more advanced weapons than we do. And we're pretty much screwed in a lot of ways right now. Yeah.
The right now we still dominate the world because of our Navy. That's still the thing that no other, I think it's like 15 countries combined can touch our Navy. But then again, we've also started to dial back our Navy. So,
well, there were times in history when Portugal had that kind of a Navy, and then one night it torched on fire. I mean, these things can take a twist for the worst pretty sudden. Yeah,
absolutely. In a nuclear age, with nuclear and EMP weapons, I mean, we could have a nationwide nuclear or an EMP Pearl Harbor surprise attack, and our entire military, not our entire military, but much of our military could be wiped out in minutes.
That's a big question. Is our carrier groups hardened? Are they
so Yeah, our carrier groups are, I mean, they have hardened electronics, but it's to Cold War PSI levels. I think, nuclear weapons in general, our hardening level was about to, I think, was very limited. The current super EMP weapons they're 5 times more powerful with their EMP effects than, Cold War or what I would call conventional nuclear weapons. So really, the answer is no. The answer is no. They're not sufficiently hardened against super EMP weapons, and China could use, one super EMP weapon for each carrier group and easily take them out if we were to fight them directly in a war over Taiwan.
And how many men would that be? Just how many sons and daughters would that be just floating dead in the ocean if they did that? I mean,
a aircraft carrier has about 3,000 sailors and airmen.
And then you've got
that plus their escorts. So it'd be several thousand. Each.
That'd be good. Just if they struck a group.
Yeah. So the whole point of I have a national security strategy that I've been advocating. Actually, I've given 4 briefings on my national security strategy, and it's available on my Real War website at dpyne.substack.com. But the whole point of it is, the way we make our country more safe and secure is we focus, as you say, on strategic defense, on, EMP hardening, tripling the size of our nuclear deterrent, building a comprehensive multi-layer missile defense system to shoot down incoming nuclear weapons. And then we continue to defend our treaty allies. But outside those our alliances, NATO, for example, we don't infringe on Russia's and China's spheres of influence. Essentially, the Russian sphere of influence is the former Soviet Union minus the Baltics, that region, and then for China, be Mongolia, Southeast Asia, South China Sea, Taiwan, North Korea, all of that area. We shouldn't be navigating the Taiwan Straits to try to tick off the Chinese. We can give arms to Taiwan, but we should establish a policy of strategic clarity in which, just as Biden did with Ukraine, we say that when he said that we won't send U.S. troops to defend Ukraine militarily, if we did the same thing with Taiwan and then tried to negotiate some kind of compromise agreement between China and Taiwan, or simply just stayed out of their business and gave them the weapons to try to allow them to defend themselves, but then if China were to blockade them, we didn't try to go to war with China, then I think our national survival would be mostly assured. It's sending, continually interfering with Russia and China on their borders and border seas with our military forces and sending arms to their neighbors that's causing them to want to attack us directly. And if they do, it could be very catastrophic for the American people.
Yeah. Or better yet, we could arm Japan. Because Japan's not in open warfare with China right now, or not being threatened, but Japan has jumped on the side of Taiwan. We could give them the boxing gloves. I mean, not that the Japanese have a history of never using boxing gloves wrongly, but we could see how this goes,
Well, I think, the only game changer that I could see would be nuclear weapons. So, in the case of Germany, obviously, we could, they could have nuclear weapons and Russia wouldn't respond. Japan, it's a little bit more, dicey, questionable whether China and North Korea would respond to that. They likely would, but it's possible that we could pull it off, especially if it was like a fait accompli and we were very secretive about it. But obviously, in the case of Taiwan, that ship has sailed. South Korea, there's no way we could give nukes to Taiwan or South Korea and not have immediate World War III with China and North Korea. Yeah. And the problem is, Russia and China and North Korea, they're all allies. In fact, Iran is a formal ally of Russia and China as well. So what I've been, writing about is that my fear is that if we get into a hot war with Russia over Ukraine or with China over Taiwan, we're going to have like a 3 or 4 front war at the same time. Because even if they don't fight with the same, the same battles, for example, like North Korea is not going to send troops to invade Taiwan, and China is not going to send troops to help Russia fight NATO. They're going to start wars, simultaneous wars against the U.S. and its allies at the same time. So, for example, if China were to blockade Taiwan and we try to break the blockade, with air and naval power, then that would be a war with China, and that would trigger an probably automatic North Korean invasion of South Korea. Iran would probably, could potentially occupy Iraq, threaten Israel. And then, of course, Russia could move against NATO, not merely against Ukraine, which doesn't pose a threat to the U.S. or NATO, but actually attack a NATO member state like the Baltics, for example, or Poland.
I'm not super concerned about Iran being able to break out against Israel. I think Israel would come out star of that stage pretty handily. Israel's proven itself over and over again. South Korea,
they have a lot more nukes than Iran does. So I that,
and not just that, but Israel is they're probably one of the smartest armies on earth in the way they maneuver, the way they've designed their military, and they really care about their soldiers more than any other country, and they've kind of designed their military over survivability of their soldiers, and I think that's a good idea for them. South Korea would be a mess. I don't think North Korea could take South Korea, not in a Kim's wettest dream. Just because South Korea has come leaps and bounds on its own. The Rock Army is utterly impressive, very tough, very strong, and they're designing their own equipment. Their weapon systems are Korean designed, Korean built. They're good weapons. They're bullpup that their infantry carries. Their APCs and that are excellent pieces of equipment, which I heard that they're sending some of those to Ukraine right now. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's true. So my belief is that the next world war is going to be it's going to inevitably escalate to the nuclear and EMP level. I mean, certainly cyber could be day one. I mean, we go to war with Russia and China. They'd probably hit us hard with cyber here at home, and most of the power would be out for perhaps for good, or else if we were to negotiate some kind of compromise settlement ending the war, then we could, quickly restore our power and reconstitute our civilization. But my worry is that the next world war won't be fought abroad. It's going to be fought here at home. If we get EMP attacks, if we get, some kind of massive cyber attack, which takes out our power, food and water distribution system for more or less indefinitely, I mean, we're going to see invasion, Russia and China occupy our coastal regions. Russia probably doesn't have, I don't think they'd send a lot of troops to the East Coast, but for sure, I think China would send a lot of troops to the West Coast. I think they'd even penetrate as far as deep into the U.S. As Utah.
Really? What's China's logistics? How are their logistics? How are their ability to send troops abroad? Last I studied, China didn't have that much ability to do a lot. I mean, hell, they tried invading Vietnam 3 times and got their asses straight handed to them.
So that was in 1979. China back then was essentially a gigantic version of North Korea. I mean, they had, obsolescent weapons, 1950s and 1960s weapon systems. They didn't have high tech. They had a small nuclear deterrent. Today, I mean, they have the largest army, the largest navy, the largest coast guard. I would argue the largest amphibious force by far.
But their navy's not made up of long traveling ships.
It's not a blue water navy.
Yeah, it's really
at least that's what they tell you, Jared.
That's what they tell us. They say they're trying to get their second aircraft carrier onto the water in the next couple years, but their first aircraft carrier isn't even the size of Japan's average World War II carrier.
Well, that's, I would have a different assessment. They have 3 aircraft carriers right now, all of which are super carriers that are about 60 to 65,000 tons each.
Okay.
Japan's carriers, I think, are more like 25,000 right now. I mean, they certainly had large 45,000 ton carriers during World War II. But yeah, China's building up, I think, to 6 carriers, but currently they only have 3. It's uncertain whether the third carrier, that's the newest carrier, is fully operational. So it could be they only have 2 fully operational carriers versus 10 to us. But absolutely, I mean, you're right. In terms of conventional terms, our Navy's superior because of our carrier air groups, and we have the finest and best trained Navy in the world. But it's not the largest, yeah. But as you said, yeah, we probably have the best blue water fleet. That said, if we were to fight China in its own backyard in the South China, East China Sea, and the vicinity of Taiwan and the Western Pacific, according to one former head of naval intelligence for the Pacific Fleet, they would outnumber us about 10 to 1 in warships. So if we fight in their backyard, they're gonna take win us, beat us decisively. Obviously, if it's purely conventional and they were to come into our backyard, I think it'd be the opposite. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, you can't put the nuclear genie back in the bottle. I mean, there's so many national security analysts that I deal with that fantasize we can fight Russia in Eastern Europe without going nuclear, EMP, or even massively cyber, or that we can bomb Chinese, nuclear missile and nuclear missile submarine and bomber sites, and they won't respond as long as it's conventional. They won't respond with nukes. I mean, that's just absurd. If we had flown a balloon, into Chinese airspace, like a massive airship like they're doing to us right now, they would shoot it down right away. I mean, they wouldn't nuke us or cyber attack us, but I mean, it's just a whole different mentality. If we fire a missile in their airspace, they're going to shoot it down. They're going to retaliate massively. I'm not sure that Biden would do the same.
Well, let me throw this out there. You said we didn't let Russia join NATO because politically we need the scary monster in the closet in order to keep the peasants at fear mode, correct?
That, or how else are we going to funnel money to Boeing?
Well, maybe they won't attack us based on the fact that they also need the scary West to keep their people in line. I mean, otherwise, why wouldn't we start talking about preemptive strikes? Why would we want to wait for them to strike us first?
Well, I mean, we no longer have the ability, in my estimation, to conduct a first strike on Russia, for example. Russia has between 10 and 12,000 SAM ABMs, S-400s and S-500s primarily, that are much more advanced than anything we have in terms of anti-ballistic missiles that could probably shoot down about 1,000 to 1,200 of our reentry vehicles. So we currently have a nuclear arsenal that consisting of about 1,515 strategic nuclear warheads that are operational. We do have 2,000 reserve that within 2 years' time we could redeploy those upon a presidential order. But that's not going to happen with Biden in charge because he's very anti-nuke. We simply don't have the nuclear arsenal that's sized large enough to be able to launch a nuclear first strike against Russia that would be successful. With China, China's they built past the size of our nuclear arsenal with their massive nuclear buildup that's going to be completed at the end of next year. By which point they'll have about 2.7 times more strategic nuclear weapons than we do. It's possible our first strike capabilities would be greater against them, but ultimately, if we don't have the missile defenses like Russia has to protect our country, I think that's really an act of national suicide. I would agree with most U.S. leaders in that regard. So I don't think that's a solution. The solution is diplomacy. At this point, we're massively outgunned at the nuclear level by Russia and China. The Sino-Russian alliance. So we have to have a more restrained foreign policy, get out of all these wars, avoid war over Taiwan with China. If they do attack or invade, we try to come up with a reunification agreement in which, at least on paper, the rights of Taiwanese citizens would be assured. Obviously, China's they're not going to keep all of their treaties or agreements with us. But if we were to forge some kind of agreement outside of war, I mean, it's very possible that they would provide limited freedoms to Taiwanese citizens over a few decades. That's what kind of essentially what we saw with Hong Kong is they were annexed in 1999, and it took about 20 to 22 years before, I think it was just over 20 years before China got really aggressive and kind of more enslaving them and stuff. So that's really, I think, the best we can hope for. Unfortunately, I love Taiwan. I've never been there myself. I was born in South Korea during the Vietnam War, but in my perfect world, we would have given Taiwan nuclear missiles back in the 80s, and China wouldn't mess with them because they'd be able to deter attack, using those nuclear weapons. But it's just not realistic at this point. There's no scenario in which China doesn't invade or attack Taiwan within the next 2 years. There's a perfect window with Biden at the helm. Biden is essentially a controlled asset of the Communist Chinese Party, having been paid millions of dollars in his personal bank account from Chinese military intelligence. So, our country's in a world of hurt right now. We can save our country, but we have to do so by avoiding these unnecessary wars with Russia and China.
So in a sense, we kind of are Chinese ourselves. That wasn't funny, but okay.
Well, we are in a tough situation on the global stage, and we're coming up against Thucydides' trap with this. And I fear that China staring down the barrel of their one-child policy, rendering them unsustainable in 12 years, is going to act pretty irrationally to try to solve that. Because it's not like they can jump on the bandwagon and give Viagra out to their populace and correct that, because it takes 30 years to correct that.
Yeah, certainly they're viewing. They're on the verge of a massive decrease in their population. But remember, China has over 4 times more people than we do. So even if they were to have their population reduced by half, they would still have a market advantage.
Population size isn't all that counts. One, their population inverts to where everyone in their population is old, and that knocks them out. Their economy gets destroyed. Imagine if our economy did that, if our population inverted to where it was, even 1-to-1, one old person to one young person. If that did that, that would be worse than an EMP going off above us, because it would have the exact same effect.
But you're thinking of it like an American. These Chinese people aren't just going to sit back and say, oh, well, this is the way it is. They're going to go out there. They're going to get Ukrainian women. They're going to get women in Africa. They're going to knock them up and make babies.
Even then, it takes 30 years to correct it. They're 20 years late.
Well, it's been a few years since they abandoned. Obviously, they got rid of their one-child policy. Yep. I think in the mid 2010s, and then
Yep, and
they essentially have a 3-child policy, I think, right now. But yeah, you're right. It's going to take a while for it to be corrected. But I would argue that China invading Taiwan, it would not be an irrational decision. Just look at all the irrational decisions that U.S. leaders have made. Attacking Iraq, which hadn't attacked its neighbors in like 11 years, posed no threat to anyone, didn't have destroyed its weapons of mass destruction per UN mandates. And we invaded them anyway. We completely wiped them out. Wiped the secular Iraqi state off the planet and replaced it with an Islamic Republic that was essentially an Iranian proxy state. So. I would argue that's a lot more irrational. A lot of the decisions, what we're doing in Ukraine, I think is a lot more irrational than what Putin did in trying to stage a limited invasion of Ukraine that secured the rights of Russians of the Donbass, and also tried to tilt it back to a neutral buffer state between Russia and NATO. I think that's inherently rational. Now, could he do something irrational? Could he have a massive strike against the U.S. and potentially have some blowback against Russia? Yeah, he could absolutely do that. But at this point, you could argue that Putin's made a lot of stupid decisions, but I don't think he's made any irrational decisions thus far. I don't think Xi in attacking Taiwan would be irrational either.
No, I don't think. I'm just going to shoot off the hip. I'm not supporting Putin when I say this, but I don't think him trying to secure a land bridge to the ports in Crimea an irrational decision. He was under threat of losing that and that being held hostage for his economic durability on the world stage. I don't know if that's irrational. I mean, Bismarck said, if goods don't cross borders, armies will. And that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think, we need to have a lot more U.S. leaders, and particularly need to have a lot more strategic empathy for Russia. I published an article in National Interest about that. I think it was back in July or August. And essentially what I said is, the best way to understand Russia better is to think about what the U.S. would do if Texas had declared independence from the U.S. 30 years ago, was trying to ally with Russia and China, had Russian and Chinese troops in its country, were staging joint military exercises with them and importing Russian and Chinese weapons. If that were to occur, the U.S. would have invaded, annexed, and bombed Texas and called it a defensive war. And that's very, essentially, Putin's doing the same thing. He's just not trying to annex all of Ukraine. He's only trying to annex like 20% of it.
It's even bigger than that. If Houston was our only port and they did that, because essentially the only port Russia has, the only warm water port Russia has is off of Crimea. That's not just military projection, but that's economic projection on the world stage.
I mean, I think Russia does have some warm water ports. Certainly, Kaliningrad. They have warm water ports in the former East Prussia, the Kaliningrad enclave, and they do have some in the Black Sea. But certainly, Odessa and Sevastopol are bigger ports, better ports, warm water ports, and that's been their naval base. I mean, their Black Sea Fleet naval headquarters all during the Soviet and Russian Empire days. So. The idea that we should help Ukraine retake Russia or Crimea, which is 75% ethnic Russian, which voted overwhelmingly to join Russia, I think is a really foolish decision, especially when Russia has declared that to be a nuclear red line. The Donbass region, I think we could certainly have, previous to the annexations that Russia did back in September, we could have had a referendum and had them vote on whether to join Russia or remain part of Ukraine. And that was part of my 15-point peace proposal to end the war in Ukraine that I issued back in June, in response to which Ukraine put me on their blacklist, along with Tucker Carlson, Tulsi Gabbard, and Rand Paul. So I'm proud to be on the Ukrainian blacklist. I'm not pro-Russian by any means.
What is a Ukrainian blacklist?
Well, that's where he has joined the dark side. I mean, if you're joining Rand Paul and Tulsi Gabbard, I mean, aren't you then a traitor to the nation or whatever their Nancy Pelosi or no, Hillary Clinton calls it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's really ironic that when an individual that puts America first and dares to put our national security interests first is condemned as some kind of, traitor. I mean, I have a friend, I won't identify him by name, but I work with him in the Utah EMP Task Force. And he's called me a seditionist. He said I'm guilty of sedition for refusing to put Ukrainian national security above our own and not support the massive transfer of weapons, U.S. weapons to Ukraine, and to dare to support a ceasefire. A ceasefire isn't. He called me an appeaser for supporting a ceasefire with Russia and Ukraine. I mean, that's just common sense. I mean, we're not going to give them anything. We're going to say, okay, we need to end this war, and the only way we can do that without negotiations is just to put an end to it with a ceasefire, like Trump has talked about. Yeah. And Trump's a patriot. I'm a patriot. Rand Paul, Tulsi Gabbard, we're all patriots. And if being a patriot and championing America, American national interests, and helping ensure our security and survival is is seditionist, then I'm happy to have that title.
Well, it's funny. He's calling what is it now? A lieutenant colonel in the Hawaiian National Guard a seditionist.
Well, in fairness, he only attacked me. He didn't attack anyone else. He said that me and a friend of mine were making, seditionist comments by supporting peace with Russia, ceasefire in the war, and not supporting aid to military assistance to Ukraine. But that's the way we avoid World War III.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way our country, there's no safety and no security for the United States of America. There's no defense of our country without avoiding World War III with Russia and China. And that's the message I'm trying to get through the thick skulls of our leaders and some of our citizens.
But you're 100% sure that if the Western world did a preemptive strike on the commies, we would not be able to sustain that?
Well, I mean, Russia's not communist. It hasn't been communist since 1991. Putin's not a communist. He's a former communist. He's certainly a Soviet-style autocrat, but autocratic leader. But I'd argue that Zelensky is as well. I mean, Zelensky's no Democrat.
I wouldn't call him Soviet-style. I would call him traditional Russian-style autocrat. Eastern European autocrat.
Potato. A commie's a commie. I mean, you're either on our side or you're not.
So just not being on our side makes you communist.
Generalizations just seem to work better.
I don't know what a preemptive strike would look like or what you would want to gain from that. I mean, do we just set off some nukes in a foreign land and deal with the repercussions of that? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm just saying everyone's talking about sitting back, waiting for them to attack us, and then us kind of absorbing that first blow. Me as a 5'5" individual, I'm always thinking the best way to go is to be the first one to throw the punch.
Okay, but the U.S. is not a 5'5" individual. The U.S. is the 6'5" juggernaut right now.
Right. So imagine that.
So if you are getting in a fight, or let's say you're approached by a 6'5" dude and he hits you first,
chances are I'm going to lose.
He's lost the fight already, because if you knock him out, all the women are going to say good job. And if he knocks you out, all the women, they're going to say good job to you. And if he knocks you out, they're going to call him a bully.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a good thought process.
I'd argue that the U.S. is not the big bully in the block. Certainly we were, we had nuclear supremacy in the late 40s and 50s, much of the 50s. I mean, the Cuban Missile Crisis, we had 9 times more nukes than the Soviets did. Today they have, 4.4 times more nukes than we do. So we're not, we're more like the 5.5 guy.
Well,
we're occupying most of the territory. So
I argue it outside of nuclear projection.
Okay.
Let's look at it like this. 1, Russia and China cannot sustain themselves alone. China cannot feed itself. Russia has the economy of what? Italy?
Germany, actually.
Or Germany.
In PPP terms.
Yeah. Now, the U.S. is probably pretty close to the only nation on earth that is self-sustaining. We can withdraw.
I would argue, that's not really the case anymore. I mean, we import at least 61% of our manufactured goods from other countries, mostly China.
We do, but
pharmaceutical-wise, 90%.
That's just because of faulty deals that were made because our government ran industry out of the nation through their tax policies, and it became more profitable for the industry. But we can sustain ourselves. China can't feed itself. Its land will not feed its population.
Well, but we have to remember. So, let's just look at, for example, the Russia sanctions. So we have about 32 Western countries out of 195 that have implemented Russian sanctions or aiding Ukraine in some way. And then we have the other 160 or so countries, 163 countries that are continuing to trade with Russia. They're not condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They're not giving any military aid to Ukraine. So it's basically 85% of the population of the world that's mostly neutral. Of course, maybe 40% of the population that's allied with Russia and China, or obviously mostly China is what that population is. But in terms of, of our own allies, 16% of the world's population is allied with the U.S. and most of the rest is neutral. So I guess my point is that, China can import food from the neutral countries that are not aligned, and as well as some of its own allies. They don't need the U.S. Their economy would take a massive hit if we were wiped out, or if they took us over after they destroyed our economy. But they can survive, just as we could adjust. We, as you mentioned, we may not be self-sustaining right now, but if we were to be cut off, we'd have a massive we'd have an economic depression. Then we go back to the way it was in World War II. In World War II, as I've said, we could be blockaded on, from Mexico, Canada, both Atlantic and Pacific, and we would be just fine because we manufactured everything here at home. And that's how we were, we armed every other country with massive amounts of weapons, in our alliance, the Soviet Union in particular, and we're able to sustain our own defenses in a massive way.
And I agree, we could do that again. It wouldn't be painless, but I would argue
it would take decades, I think, 20 years.
I would argue without us, China would die on the vine, because China economy dries up because we're the ones who they export to.
In many ways, we need each other, is what you're saying.
I don't think we need China, but I think China needs us.
See, I would argue the opposite. China has a manufacturing industrial base that's now nearly double the size of our own. So they make everything. They're basically the U.S. back in World War II.
I agree.
They don't have the raw materials. They don't have all the raw materials. They need to import fuel, food, basic raw materials to sustain their industrial economy.
But what else is the other part of that industrial economy? The third part is the customer. And I think without us, China has no customer. Their economy dies.
Well, they have 1.4 billion domestic customers.
Yeah. But their domestic customers are just barely coming into this world where they want to have things. I don't think their economy, I don't think there's enough desire in their populace to support their economy by itself. That's just my thoughts.
Like I said, it'd be a huge shock to the Chinese economy. I think we would lose. It would be a much huger shock to our economy if we were to cut off trade with China than it would be to theirs. But the main thing is they would lose massively on the profit side, on the economic growth side. We would just not have the basic necessities to sustain ourselves outside of agriculture. We'd have plenty of food to sustain ourselves, but in terms of manufacturing goods, we just don't build the stuff. We don't build the microelectronics, the computers, the cars. We could probably do all right with, but
we still build the high level.
We're more of a service-oriented economy now. We're essentially a colonial economy. But
I wonder if it would, just a thought, here's me thinking outside the box. Do you think maybe it might be a boon for our economy if something like that happened? Because our economy would revert from the service economy back into a mobilization economy like the build up to World War II.
Absolutely. And I wrote an article in August on my website advocating exactly that. We need to shock our economy now. We're at peace. Mm-hmm. We don't we'll refuse to go to war with China over Taiwan, but let's have maybe what I call an economic war, where we just kind of strictly limit trade. We resource, instead of outsourcing our manufacturing industries, we reshore them to the U.S. And then we build up the massive manufacturing economy we had during World War II. We'll never have that dominance. We'll never have that economic dominance. But even if we just get parity with China, that would be sufficient, I think, to sustain us and to make us a strong industrial power on the level of China. Once again, that's, that's really economically independent, because we don't have economic independence right now. We haven't for at least 20 years, I think.
Yeah.
It'll shift. It'll shift over to South America. It'll shift over to maybe Africa or somewhere like that. But I doubt we would actually bring back manufacturing.
I wouldn't mind seeing Zenith and General Electric in households again, you know, instead of General Electric making engines for tanks. How about General Electric make a microwave again? Yes, I know they do still make stoves and fridges, but rarely.
Yeah, I mean, so it's one thing to have to buy goods from our allies, you know, having to buy manufacturing goods from Japan, from Taiwan, countries like that we're allied with, but to have to buy them from our enemies. I mean, you know, if we're in a war, that's the first thing that gets shut off. Mm-hmm. I mean, all of, you know, our 90% of our pharmaceutical life-saving goods come from China. I mean, I think that's maybe not as high now with COVID. You know, we've had a little shock therapy there, but yeah, I mean, it's not sustainable.
It's ridiculous, and it showed it in 2019 and 2020 when we couldn't get masks, we couldn't get some vitamins. I mean, there were things that were confiscated at the ports.
It's very beta male like. I mean, it's almost like a degradation of our society when we have to suck up to the people who abuse us.
Well, we got fat and lazy.
And that was really China's plan all along. I mean, that's what they're trying to do. They don't want war with us. They want to take us over economically, and they're doing it. They've been doing it over the last 20 years. And obviously they've captured our elites, you know, Republicans and Democrats alike. There's, you know, Mitch McConnell, John Boehner, they're all in bed with China. You know, Biden, Pelosi, they all have massive economic ties, you know, personal ties, business ties with China that they're personally enriched by. And then they pursue very, you know, pro-Chinese policies. So,
and it doesn't even have to be Chinese buying them off. It could be their corporate sponsors here in the U.S. because our corporations, as the NBA proved, as what's that guy's the head of the NBA's name? He proved when Cantor came out and talked about freeing Hong Kong or whatever. They kicked an NBA player out because he spoke out against China. Because, I mean, the NBA wants to be in China. Disney will film a movie right next to a concentration camp in China and thank them for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, in the good old days of World War II, I mean, there was a saying that's what's good for General Motors is good for America, and that was true. You know, our large corporations were actually patriotic. They were pro-American. They pursued nationalist policies. And now, I mean, it's the exact opposite. I mean, they tend to favor China over the U.S. itself.
It's a bigger market.
And like you said, they pride themselves on it. They pride themselves on being traitors to their own country. Now, I don't mean traitors in the literal sense, but essentially economic traitors, where they're going against the interests of the U.S. of U.S. national security on a business level.
Well, we've turned our corporate bosses no longer are citizens. They're all they care about is being a corporate boss. And Mark Cuban, that's his name. He wanted into China because what is it, 6.5 billion people or whatever is a larger market, more NBA teams, more of that than our measly 360 million.
Yeah, I mean, it's all, you know, I don't blame them. To be honest, I don't blame them. I blame the U.S. politicians that enacted most favored nation trade status with China, WTO membership with China. Literally, our laws are set up to encourage and incentivize economic treason against our own country.
Yep.
So, I mean, they're only doing what you know they've been incentivized by U.S. economic laws and trade laws to do.
Yep.
And you know, Trump was the first president to try to reverse that and try to get back on a, you know, pre-Eisenhower trade policy where we actually, you know, had a trade policy that encouraged the U.S. manufacturing to stay at home instead of exporting it to our enemies.
Yeah, not just our enemies. Why is most headquarters in Ireland? Because if they headquarter in Ireland, they get a drop on taxes. Because if they headquarter over here, the U.S. is going to, for lack of a better term, rape them. But if they headquarters in Ireland, the U.S. will let them ship stuff in and no problem.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things like that, I think.
Yeah. And it's just if I was to label a failure in the U.S., it's our government. Our government has failed at everything they tried, like monkeys fucking a football.
But the economy is supposed to work this way. I mean, it's supposed to search out the richest, most fertile areas to make money from. And it doesn't care what government it is. It doesn't care about geopolitical lines. It's supposed to be its own little animal searching for that resource, which is the money.
Sure, but our government shouldn't write laws to incentivize it.
Yeah, I think that's, I guess I have to fundamentally disagree with that. I know that's kind of the Milton Friedman free trade, kind of the Mike Lee and other free traders, even Rand Paul that have advocated free trade with China, unilateral free trade, which I think has been disastrous. I mean, I love Mike Lee. I work for him. I think he's one of the two best senators in the country. Yeah, I think unilateral free trade. And when I say unilateral free trade, I mean, we're having no tariffs, right? We got the 4% tariff, and China's got 25 to 100% tariff on everything we sell them. If not more. I mean, some of their tariffs go exceed 100%, and then they have like the currency manipulation, which I've learned is like 25 to 40% equivalent tariff on top of that. So, I mean, that's not when we talk about an economy, for me, an economy is a national economy. And that's, I think, the view of U.S. leaders up until, I don't know, Bush or Clinton, probably. And I think we need to return to that. I mean, a national economy that enriches Americans. I mean, we've gotten poor in terms of real wages. Why? Because of the globalist economy, because we have a unilateral free trade with other countries. And if we simply had a law that said, an executive order that the president passed that said we'll automatically match every tariff that China passes. So if they lower tariffs, we have low tariffs. If they height and double the tariffs to 100%, we have 100% tariffs. So that incentivizes them to lower their tariffs, but it also gives us a balanced playing field. Even though their labor is ridiculous, will always be ridiculously cheaper. So we'll still have disadvantages, but at least we won't have the tariff disadvantages that really have hurt our country and really funded and fueled the massive nuclear and military buildup that China's had, which, if those trillions of dollars, I think they'd be much weaker militarily today.
100%. That without the intellectual property capture they get to have and also I think the U.S. needs to start saying they need to have a policy that says, we're going to have two different tax brackets on stuff you produce. If it's produced here in the U.S., it falls under this tax bracket. And if it's produced abroad, the taxes are different. We need to incentivize some of our manufacturers to start producing stuff over here because let's face it, the vitamin companies we have a problem with, 3M. Where's 3M from? 3M is from the United States.
Yeah, but they're all over the world.
But they make almost everything in China because they get to make it over there for cheaper and bring it over here for cheaper and headquarters themselves in another nation for cheaper. Let's incentivize them to bring that manufacturing back here.
Now, I want to just minimize this conversation to an example here in Tooele County. Our government here in Tooele County will always talk about how we need to buy local. They proclaim that it's our duty as citizens of Tooele County to buy local, use local products. And when it comes time to build a police station, they outsource it, right? I mean, in the end, money is what matters when it comes to the economy and the free movement of goods and services and money. I mean, I'd like to say, hey, let's teach Africa how to manufacture products as a nation and start importing from them. But we can't. The economy is, even if China does take over the world, they'll still have to deal with an economy. And that economy will eventually maneuver around them too. It doesn't matter what government it is.
China's already dealing with that in Indonesia because their people are buying stuff that are made in Indonesia. Because Indonesia's the up and comer. But all I'm saying is our government has to stop making policies that punish people who produce in the U.S., which is what our government has done for the last 20 years.
100%.
That.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And, and the liberals have said for decades that, government is the solution to everything.
Yeah.
I actually have to agree with them because it's, if we were to, kind of liberal, make the government pursue like more conservative pro-American policies, that would solve most of our problems.
Yeah.
I mean, economically, trade-wise, in terms of enriching the American people, getting more money in their pockets to spend, and save, incentivizing savings, for example, by eliminating the income tax entirely and replacing it with a moderate national sales tax and a tariff-based economy that we had before.
But David,
we could do that and enrich our country and our citizens.
But David, then how will people who want to have they, them in their pronouns get their way?
We could export them to China.
I would say they'd be perfect for the front lines in Ukraine. But.
Yes.
You know what? I love it when they go all, I don't know, start preaching. And the countries they preach for are countries that wouldn't allow them in. China wrote a law 2 years ago that in their movies and television, they can't even portray effeminate men, let alone homosexuality and transgenderism. The men can't even be effeminate. And those guys are like cheering on China. And I'm like, if you were in China, your life would be awful. Here in the U.S., you get to live freely, move amongst the world, quit crying. But they just, I don't know.
I think they'd be rooming with Uyghurs or something if they moved to China. Because those countries, they throw them off of bridges and hang them from cranes. It's not it's not a happy world out there.
They're outcasts in China. In China, they're not being openly killed. Russia's a little tighter on them than China, but they're just outcasts, But they'll go out like when you see them, the transgenders for Palestine. In Palestine, they want to see if they can fly.
Just a few years ago, they were throwing them off of ships. No, they were throwing them off of ships in Brazil when they joined the military over there. I mean, they don't talk about that, but that's it's everywhere except for here. Here, it's like this special bubble for these fantasy worlds.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sad. China and Russia have recruitment videos that are manly and have these. Just really masculine, type army videos that, appeal to people who want to, go to war. And then we have recruitment videos with,
my two moms,
a female soldier with two lesbian moms, and with cartoons, even a cartoon of the lesbian moms in the video. And we think that's going to recruit anyone. I mean, and we are destroying our military from within.
It didn't show any military readiness in ours. It didn't even show, like we've got female infantry now in the Army. They're called, what are they called? Comanche units or whatever. And that's, agree with it or not, that would at least, if they'd have showed that I'm a female infantryman, I'm learning to shoot, that would have been even a little further than what we did.
Banshee units?
Comanche.
Oh.
I think they're called Comanche units. We've got 4 or 5 of them. Most of them are in the 101st. They've got a horrible attrition rate due to pregnancy. Everyone hold your breath. I know we're all shocked about that, but I actually aided a young lady in getting into it a while ago, a couple of years ago. She got in and got out, but fine young lady, whatever. And it's a good test. The Marine Corps is now starting to try it as well. But that the Chinese one, that showed technical and like a technical prowess on the military, on the battlefield. And the Russian one was awesome. It showed a sniper and an infantry sniper. And we have a girl who 2 moms took her to a fair, so she joined the Army and became a, I don't know, intel analyst or something. And that's just not a, I don't know, it's just not hardcore.
It doesn't give us those manly vibes that we feel like we need to survive in nature. Is that what you're saying?
I think if you're going to portray the military on the open world stage, you want to show the military. You want to show something tough. You know, University of Utah is going to sell University of Utah through its sports programs or its medical program, not through its, gender studies degree.
Well, David, since you're the individual who studies this stuff on a daily basis, what's your prediction for the outcome of Ukraine?
Ooh.
Well, I think, there's multiple different scenarios, but I think at this point, Russia is on the verge of a massive winter offensive that I've been predicting since September when they announced full mobilization of the Russian military.
Do you think they're going to invade before winter's over? I've been kind of predicting that April will be a busy time there once the thaw and the dry out happens.
Yeah, so Russia made Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov made a statement in which he said, expect Russia to outshine NATO on the first anniversary of the Russian invasion. Essentially saying, you're going to see some big things happen militarily in Ukraine with the Russian forces. So I think the offensive is planned to start prior to that date, or at the very least by the February 24th.
So we got
and I think it's going to. Yeah, I think Russia. I would not be surprised if they took control of nearly half of Ukraine's territory, and then Putin would simply just give an ultimatum to Zelensky and say, we'll give part of your territory back, and we'll only annex a third of your country. And they've already annexed, near 20% nearly already. So just be another, 10% of Ukraine in exchange for peace, or we'll just annex, if you don't agree to peace, we'll do what we did in September and we'll just annex everything we occupy. So, the choice really, that's why it's so, I'm trying to prioritize, the idea that a ceasefire right now is the best case scenario for Ukraine, because if the longer this war continues, the worse the terms will be for Ukraine that they'll be forced to accept, and the more territory they'll lose, the more people will die, and at the same time, I don't think the chances of Russian nuclear attack on the U.S. are high. I think that it's pretty low, but cyber attack. If we send, for example, if Biden were to send any combat troops into Ukraine in force, like, has been talked about with the 101st Airborne, which is exercising just a few miles from the Ukrainian border in Romania, if they were to send those to Odessa or Western Ukraine, if we were to have a no-fly zone in Western Ukraine to prevent the Ukrainians from being wiped out, that would be it. That would be World War III, and we get cyber attacked within days.
Well, not to mention, let's say we send the 101st over. What happens if they get rolled over? What's our response then? That boxes us into a pretty ugly situation where either Biden has to lose face on the whole, much like he did in Afghanistan, or ramp it up even more. I don't see a win for that. I would argue right now, we need to open up this is just me. We need to open up the treaty lines with Russia. We need to say, look, we're going to give you a land bridge to Crimea. We'll draw out this line. We'll give you a land bridge. You'll have everything east of that land bridge. You know what? We'll build the damn highway for you, and open negotiations that way. But if you don't give him a choice, he's going to go right to that river and take everything to that river, guaranteed. That's the goal.
Yeah, right. The Dnipro River. So This is my last point because I have to go. But you're absolutely right. And in fact, I wrote an article just yesterday based on revelation that Biden actually did make that offer. He actually according to Newsweek, he actually did offer in mid-January for Russia to keep all the territory it's occupied, essentially, on a permanent basis in exchange for peace. And I think that was, I actually don't think, and that's what the article said in Newsweek. That's what the reports were from a German newspaper. German politicians were revealing that. I think it wasn't quite that expansive, because I think if it had been, that Putin would have accepted. I think it fell short of that in a significant way. I think maybe it said you can keep all the Donbass region, but maybe give back Kherson and Zaporizhia. So no land bridge. I think it probably said, short of a land bridge. But at least they were thinking in the right direction, so that Biden personally authorized and directed that the peace overture be made, and that it be made directly to Russia without Ukrainian permission. But of course,
Zelensky, would Zelensky shut that out?
Yeah, and he did. He did refuse that, but that's the problem: is that Putin has never been the main obstacle for peace. I mean, Russia's had peace terms on the table since day 2 of the war, without exception. I mean, right now, I think a ceasefire, I think they would accept it.
I think they would too.
Even though they're about to stage this massive offensive, I think Putin would consider that a win, and it wouldn't be a total win. It would be a limited victory, but it would allow him to save face, and then we could save what's left of Ukraine. I mean, we could rebuild Ukraine. There's almost 8 million refugees that have left Ukraine that we could send back to the country. I mean, it's estimated would cost $700 billion to rebuild the Ukrainian economy, but half the businesses have had to close down since the war began. So, I mean, just that alone, allowing the businesses to reopen, whatever 29% of their population to return home. I mean, those would be huge wins. And if we spun it the right way, we could say, hey, we stood up to Russia, and our propaganda line is he was trying to take all of Ukraine. And if we could say he only got 19%, we saved 81%. We have ironclad security guarantees. If Russia attacks Ukraine again, we now have a security guarantee outside of NATO that their neutrality will be guaranteed by the United States, and they're part of the EU now. I think that's a win. That we need to start thinking of win-win solutions, compromises. That's what Reagan, JFK did that in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Reagan did that with Gorbachev to end the Cold War. I mean, that's how we ensure the security of the U.S. and its allies. And people just don't understand that. They think it's appeasement. Anything short of unconditional surrender is appeasement, and that's just completely false.
Well, and both sides could spin it to their favor. Russia could say, look, we got our land bridge. We could say, look, we defended, 80% of Ukraine, and both sides could spin it their way. What they don't understand is in those days when we were making deals, we had a lot more projectability on the world stage. But now that we are drying up in our projectability, we've lost a lot of favor around the world. We've kind of abused our good hand that was dealt to us in, through the 2000 to 2021, and
Europe won't even arm themselves. I mean, they're relying completely on us, it seems like, to give them that free vacation.
Yeah. And so I think you're right. We do need to strike a peace deal.
Yeah.
That's the only way. And then everyone's going to say I'm a war hawk for thinking that way, or they're going to say that I'm a Putin apologist. But look, either we've got to commit to this World War III and then learn how to make fires with bow drills in 2 years, or I think we need to start using some diplomacy.
I think we either have to preemptively strike with nuclear weapons or secede that land to Putin and fortify where we can.
Yeah, I don't.
I'll take the second choice any day.
Yeah, I don't want to introduce nuclear weapons onto the world, because there would be a response, and
we might win.
Sure.
We could win. Okay. There's no chance of winning.
Yeah, I don't think there's such a thing as a win. In that situation, there's no win.
Well, you tell that to the liberals.
There's no win at all. Even if they don't send a response back, there's no win. The refugees alone that would be flooding out of Europe, Some of them coming here is a loss.
Well, Russia would have plenty of women then. I mean, I'm sorry, not Russia, China, because they'd all go there, right? I mean,
I doubt it. No, they're not going to go from just left a Soviet state, 20 years ago to enter back into it. They would be looking at coming west.
Yeah, I think you made a really important point, and that it is we no longer have nuclear superiority. They have nuclear superiority over us, Russia and China, maybe even nuclear supremacy. Just military, the military balance of power has shifted badly against us. We have the allies, but we don't have the nuclear firepower to back it up. We don't have the massive military that we used to have to back it up. In the Cold War days, we had all of that, and that's why it was a victory in the Cold War. If we had to fight the Cold War with the nuclear weapons, nuclear arsenal we have today, and the sorry state of the military we have, I mean, Russia would have taken us over. I'm convinced. So
I still think, who was it that said? Someone said the best thing we could have done during the Cold War is bomb Russia with blue jeans and pornography. And I think they're right, because you get into those totalitarian states, and giving them that taste of freedom is so subversive.
Well, I think that's kind of what we did. I mean, yeah. Russia, Gorbachev decided to collapse the Soviet Union, and then Russia did liberalize.
Yep.
During the Yeltsin years, I mean, there was a lot of economic liberalization going on. I mean, in fact, they're more liberalized today than were during the Soviet times. Obviously, they're far from a free economy like we have here, but we essentially kind of did do that. We were able to defeat the Soviet Union and get them to collapse because Reagan was willing to negotiate. Obviously Russia's not going to collapse. It's not going to fragment. There's no chance of that. Putin's not going to go away. He's not going to die. He's not going to be overthrown. He's not going to leave Ukraine, but he does want peace with us. That's the amazing thing. He's a rational actor. He wants peace with us. He wants to be integrated into the West. He still wants to have an integrated Russian economy with the EU. We can accomplish a lot, but it starts with a ceasefire in Ukraine and cutting off all military assistance to Ukraine.
Forcing Zelensky to come to the table. Tell him, look, we can't support you forever. You've got to come to the table. You've got to make peace.
Right.
And that's because Zelensky, I don't think he would be able to carry on the fight without foreign aid.
He wouldn't. It's just like even Britain and the Allies in World War I and II. They were entirely dependent on U.S. Financial and economic and military assistance. And if we had pulled that back, the war would have World War I would have ended in a compromise agreement. Britain would have had to make peace with Hitler and accept his offer to withdraw from 80% of German-occupied Europe and watch him, the Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union kill each other off. And I think that's really we have to have that kind of thinking where the strategy, it's not, we have to fight the enemy. It's like, how about we get the enemy to fight each other? How about we figure out a way to divide and disrupt the Sino-Russian alliance? Because right now we have two nuclear superpowers against one. Who's going to win? If we fight a war, they win. We're going to lose, guaranteed. So the way to resolve that situation, the strategic dilemma, I think, is through a friendship treaty with Russia, a strategic partnership, like I've advocated and Dr. Peter Pry advocated before he died, that would neutralize the Sino-Russian alliance. They're going to stay allies, but if they had an alliance with us, then Russia wouldn't go to war. They wouldn't go to war with us if China invaded Taiwan. We got into war with them. So then worst case, it's war with China by itself and North Korea, is that a war we can win? Who knows? But without Russian military backing, at least we have a fighting chance.
And also if we brought Russia onto our side, that might back China off. Yeah,
that's right. It would make them think twice. If they don't have Russian backing and, they might even be worried about Russia allying with us or giving us some kind of military assistance or technology or whatever the heck might be, or even operating, allowing us to operate from Russian bases. They could say, we want to compromise with Taiwan.
Russia is China's backyard.
Yeah, Russia's the key. make war with Russia, we're done as a country. If we turn them to be a neutral, then I think we're a safer, secure country.
Yeah. And I don't know why we've postured since the end of the Cold War as if Russia needs to be a perennial enemy, and we need to end that posturing. I think we need to end that posturing with any country that we can build an alliance with.
Yeah, I mean, communist China is always going to be an enemy. I mean, the communist system, you talk about communism, Dave. As a communist country, it's fundamentally opposed to everything we stand for. It's genocidal, so it's always going to be an enemy. But we don't need to fight. We don't need to fight China. We can fight them on trade and economics, differences and sanctions. We don't have to fight them militarily. It can be a great power competition with China. And then we can turn Russia to be more of a Western power, and the world will be a lot safer place. I mean, that's what Trump tried to do. He actually ran on that. He ran on a tripolar international order in which we gave Russia a sphere of influence and resolved all of our differences without betraying our NATO allies, and getting them to be a separate pole from China. Right now, it's a bipolar world with Russia and China on one side and the U.S. on the other. But in a tripolar order with Russia, China, and the U.S., we can play each other off. No one has a permanent alliance or is allied at all. Then we're all kind of just focusing on our own spheres of influence as regional powers, and that's really, I think, the most stable international order that I can imagine right now.
Yeah, leave on this: Russia and China aren't natural friends. They went proxy wars against each other all through the 70s and 80s in Vietnam, in Cambodia. Those were proxy wars. Russia and China aren't natural just because they were both communists. We've pushed them into being friends.
Exactly. Russia's only an enemy because of our policies and expanding NATO and other hostile policies. Yeah, that's right.
Well, we're going to let you go, David. Thank you very much for your time. And this has been a very enlightening conversation. I love talking with people who, I love talking about dystopian stuff because it's, entertaining, but I love talking to people who think outside the box and who like to draw in lots of different facts and build a bigger picture, and don't just give me the CNN hot take of the day or Fox News hot take of the day. And I really enjoy that.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Yeah, thanks a lot for letting me be on your show, and I hope you have a great night.
We're going to have you back on, especially if towards the end of the month we see Russia boil back up. I was thinking they would do it after the frost and the mud left, but if they kick it off earlier, I mean, they invaded last year in February, so why not?
Yeah.
When Russia invaded last year, it wasn't really an invasion. They hadn't even mobilized their military for that one.
Now they didn't mobilize at all.
We're seeing big numbers thrown up on the board this go around. It's going to be destructive regardless.
Yeah, it's going to be a real war. And again, I'd like to encourage all your listeners to join my subscribe to my The Real War newsletter at dpyne.substack.com.
Okay, dpyne at substack.com. It's going to be in the show notes.
We'll throw it up.
Jump on there, read it. We live in a heavily mobile world right now, and I guess drawing the information is good.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, David, and we will talk to you very soon.
Have a good night.
Okay, sounds good. You too.
Bye.